In the vast and often overwhelming expanse of human experience, there are regions that no satellite can detect, no compass can point to, and no map has ever marked. These are not lands you can walk upon or see with your eyes. They are invisible yet powerful domains made of thought, emotion, memory, and the subtle architecture of the psyche. They exist within us, beneath our words, behind our actions, and inside the silence we carry. Carl Jung, one of the most daring minds in modern psychology, dedicated his life to charting these inner realms. He did not warn us of wars or natural disasters. He warned of something far more insidious, the quiet, unseen forces within ourselves that, when ignored, quietly eat away at the soul. He spoke of internal landscapes where the spirit can drift off course, not because of a lack of effort or morality, but because of the overwhelming pull of unseen patterns and unacknowledged pain. These psychological terrains are not simply defined by what we do wrong or the flaws we show to the world. They are immersive mental environments, states of being, that gradually alter how we see, feel, and exist. They are places where the light of self-awareness dims, where clarity becomes clouded, where our sense of dignity withers without warning. In these spaces, we don't just lose direction, we begin to lose the compass itself. A person can seem fully functional, even successful on the outside, yet internally wander these territories without ever knowing it. Jung believed that these mental landscapes are not fiction or metaphor. They are real in their effect, real in their consequences, and dangerously subtle in how they take hold. He saw how entire lives could be built on unexamined beliefs, on repressed memories, on shadows pretending to be the truth. To step into these inner regions unknowingly is to live half awake. It is to be moved not by conscious will, but by forces buried beneath awareness. And without introspection, we become tourists in our own minds, unaware of who's truly steering the journey. Jung didn't just offer insight, he offered a mirror. A mirror not for the face we show the world, but for the soul we rarely confront. In this mirror, we're asked to see not just who we are, but where we are within ourselves. Because not all prisons have bars, and not all dangers announce themselves with noise. Some dwell quietly in the very thoughts we never question. Jung understood that suffering, when consciously examined with courage and sincerity, could serve as the seedbed of profound personal transformation. In his view, pain was not just something to be endured, it was a doorway, a threshold that could lead us deeper into understanding ourselves and the nature of our existence. But he also issued a solemn warning: suffering, when left unchecked and unexamined, can become toxic. It transforms from a potential teacher into a silent tyrant, dragging us into cycles of despair, victimhood, and unconscious sabotage. Instead of becoming fuel for growth, it becomes a trap that slowly erodes our will to evolve. Suffering without insight is not just stagnant, it is dangerous. It distorts our inner world, reshapes our self-image in corrosive ways, and builds invisible walls that isolate us from joy, love, and meaning. In his vast exploration of the psyche, Jung identified several of these psychological environments, metaphorical places within the mind, where the soul must not linger for too long. These are not brief emotional states, they are energetic territories that pull us in like gravity, subtly convincing us that there's no way out. One of the most deceptive of these is the realm of denial. This is the terrain where the shadow self is cast out and disowned, where the darkest, most unpolished parts of ourselves are pushed into the unconscious, hidden away like unwanted memories in a locked attic. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This wasn't just a philosophical observation, it was a diagnostic warning. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, includes everything within us that we consciously reject or ignore. It is made up of the raw, unfiltered energies that don't fit the polished version of who we think we're supposed to be. Rage, jealousy, bitterness, unresolved fear, old wounds, forbidden desires, and even the talents we've been too afraid to claim, all live in the shadow. These elements aren't inherently evil. They are not marks of moral failure. They are simply unknown, unloved, and unintegrated. Denial, then, is more than turning away from truth. It is a psychological self-banishment. We exile parts of ourselves because we're afraid of what they might reveal. We push down the shame, we silence the grief, we cover up the anger, and we polish our exterior while our interior remains fractured. But the truth is, what we deny does not disappear, it waits. And while it waits, it manipulates. When we disown the shadow, we surrender control of our behavior to it. We begin to react in ways that confuse even ourselves. We lash out unexpectedly, fall into the same destructive patterns, sabotage relationships, and blame the world for our pain, never realizing we are being ruled by what we refuse to face. To dwell in denial is to live in a psychological funhouse, a distorted space where every reflection is warped and no mirror shows your true face. You begin to see projections everywhere, enemies in friends, threats in challenges, and rejection where none exists. Life becomes a hall of confusion, and you lose the ability to separate illusion from truth. Jung believed that confronting the shadow was not an act of weakness, but of immense inner strength. It is the starting point of real healing, not healing that suppresses symptoms, but healing that reclaims lost power and restores a fractured self. Integrating the shadow is not about becoming flawless, it's about becoming whole. Wholeness, in Jung's philosophy, is not perfection. It is a grounded, authentic existence rooted in the courage to see ourselves fully, to hold both light and darkness in awareness, and to act from a place of truth rather than fear. This sacred work of reintegrating the unconscious into the conscious mind is what Jung called individuation, a long and often painful journey towards psychological maturity. It requires honesty. It demands vulnerability. And it insists that we stop running from the parts of ourselves we've been taught to fear. When we finally choose to face the shadow, we take the first real step toward reclaiming our lives, not as puppets of unconscious forces, but as aware, responsible, and evolving human beings. Another perilous state of the psyche is the swamp of resentment, a thick, murky psychological bog where unresolved pain is never given the opportunity to transform or evolve. In this space, emotional wounds are not healed but recycled, turned over again and again until they harden into bitterness. Carl Jung understood that suffering, if left unexplored, decays into resentment, a slow-acting toxin that doesn't free us but binds us tighter to our past. It's not a clean pain, but a dirty one that clings and repeats, whispering old narratives into new situations. Resentment is the wounded self's attempt at control, retelling the same story of betrayal in a desperate effort to make sense of it. But in doing so, we unwittingly re-traumatize ourselves. The ones who hurt us may be long gone, unaware, or unbothered, yet we remain imprisoned by the emotional residue. Jung believed that to truly heal, we must stop feeding the cycle. Transformation begins not by forgetting what happened but by refusing to let pain fossilize into identity. Forgiveness, in his view, isn't about dismissing injustice, it's about choosing not to anchor your soul in the past. It's a reclaiming of energy, a conscious decision to purify the emotional system, turning the heavy lead of resentment into the gold of emotional liberation. Right beside this swamp lies another psychological snare, the prison of guilt and shame, a bleak and claustrophobic inner space where the self is not merely criticized, but condemned. Here, mistakes aren't seen as missteps to be corrected, but as permanent stains on one's character. Guilt says, "I did wrong," but shame declares, "I am wrong." And that distinction, Jung warned, can define whether a person seeks growth or sinks into despair. Shame is a silent assassin of the spirit. It isolates, corrodes, and convinces us that we are unworthy of healing, connection, or even forgiveness. Individuals who reside in this mental prison may still function outwardly. They might smile, succeed, and perform, but internally, they carry a quiet but persistent belief that something in them is fundamentally broken. Jung emphasized that the journey out of this emotional incarceration begins not with self-punishment but with radical self-acceptance. True healing is not about striving for flawlessness, but about embracing our flaws with honesty and compassion. As long as shame remains unchallenged, it paralyzes, preventing change, progress, or peace. But when we confront the inner judge, the the merciless voice within that repeats our worst fears, we begin to loosen its grip. Our errors are part of our learning, not our identity. And no matter how tangled the past may be, it never has the final word unless we allow it to. The theater of persona is where the self becomes a performer and the truth of our identity begins to vanish behind a carefully constructed mask. Carl Jung introduced the idea of the persona as the image we project to the world, the polished version of ourselves designed to win approval, to belong, and to meet societal expectations. This mask may be necessary in certain contexts, such as in professional life or social roles, but when we forget it's a mask and begin to believe it is who we truly are, we lose touch with our essence. The danger is subtle. We don't realize the shift when authenticity is replaced by performance. We wear smiles we don't feel, express beliefs we don't hold, and play roles that slowly drain our vitality. The longer we live in the persona, the more distant we become from our authentic self, until even solitude feels foreign because we've forgotten how to be real. Jung cautioned that the soul cannot flourish in an artificial identity, it withers in the spotlight of falsehood. Psychological growth demands that we step off the stage, that we remove the mask even when it feels safer to keep it on. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires a bold and unsettling question. Who am I when no one is watching? To reclaim our inner truth, we must be willing to risk rejection, to be misunderstood, and to walk away from roles that no longer fit. Only then can the soul breathe again. In shedding the persona, we don't lose ourselves, we finally meet the person we've always been beneath the performance. And yet, even when the mask falls away, many still find themselves trapped, not in a performance, but in a prison of thought. The labyrinth of overthinking is another psychological terrain where clarity is replaced with confusion, and the intellect becomes its own worst enemy. Jung described this state as a mental maze, where the mind loops endlessly around questions, fears, and hypotheticals, seeking certainty in a world that seldom offers it. Overthinking masquerades as caution or wisdom, but in reality, it paralyzes action. The thinker becomes the prisoner, stuck in a fog of what-ifs and overanalysis, convinced that every decision must be perfect, every emotion must be justified. In this trap, intuition is silenced, creativity is stifled, and the individual becomes disconnected from the deeper rhythms of the soul. Jung urged us to remember that not all truths emerge from logic, many come from the unconscious, from dreams, symbols, instincts, and feelings that cannot be explained but are deeply known. The mind is a powerful tool, but it is not the whole of who we are. Healing often comes from letting go of the need to understand everything and learning to trust the quiet nudges within. To escape this mental labyrinth, we must be willing to act before all the answers arrive, to feel rather than dissect, and to embrace the uncertainty that lives at the edge of growth. The mind seeks control, but the soul seeks connection, and in that space between knowing and surrender, transformation begins. The desert of isolation is not merely a quiet place, it is a psychological wasteland where the soul begins to dry out, slowly and imperceptibly. Carl Jung grasped the seductive lie of isolation, that if we cut ourselves off from others, we can avoid pain, disappointment, and betrayal. Many who enter this desert do so with a sense of control. They say, "I don't need anyone," mistaking emotional self-protection for strength. But beneath the surface of independence often lies a fear of intimacy and an aversion to vulnerability. At first, the silence may feel peaceful, even powerful. Yet over time, that silence turns into loneliness, and the power becomes numbness. We stop sharing, stop reaching, stop hoping. We tell ourselves stories about how connection is weakness and how we are better off alone. But Jung saw through this illusion. He believed that while solitude is necessary for introspection, healing requires relationship. Our deepest wounds, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, are born in connection, but so too are love, belonging, and transformation. We cannot fully find ourselves in isolation because the self is revealed, mirrored, and nurtured in relationship. To fear connection is to cut ourselves off from the very conditions that allow the psyche to grow. True strength lies not in never needing others, but in allowing ourselves to be seen, even in our brokenness. When we fear vulnerability, we fear life itself, and in that fear, we drift further into the desert, away from the waters of belonging that the soul was created to drink. And if the desert is where connection is feared, then the graveyard of the past is where time stands still, where the living spirit becomes tethered to memories that no longer breathe. Jung warned that too many dwell among the ruins of what was, turning regret into routine and grief into identity. This is not a conscious choice but a quiet decay. The mind returns again and again to lost opportunities, unresolved apologies, and unhealed losses. There is a strange comfort in the familiarity of pain. It becomes home, a sanctuary of suffering that feels safer than facing the unknown. But Jung challenged us to recognize that we cannot build a future while clinging to the ashes of yesterday. The past must be acknowledged, yes, honored. Mourning is not weakness, it is a sacred act of the soul. But mourning must lead somewhere, it must evolve into movement. When we fixate on who we used to be, what we used to have, or what we failed to do, we abandon the only place where change is possible, the present moment. The psyche, as Jung taught, is always striving toward wholeness. It calls us forward, not backward. Letting go is not forgetting, nor is it betrayal. It is the radical act of freeing ourselves from identities that have expired. It is the quiet courage to say, I bless what brought me here, but I will not live there anymore. In choosing presence over the past, we reclaim the future. We return to life. These 7 psychological terrains are not made of soil, sky, or stone, yet their impact is as real as any battlefield. They exist within the invisible fabric of our consciousness, shaping how we think, feel, act, and even love. They are not imaginary, they are lived. These are not just moods or mindsets but entire inner ecosystems, and if we wander through them unaware, they can become our home without us realizing we've moved in. Some whisper comfort while slowly draining our vitality, others confront us with raw terror. But all of them, if entered unconsciously, have the power to distort our identity, silence our inner voice, and fragment the very core of who we are. Carl Jung's insights weren't just intellectual theories, he handed us sacred maps for navigating the soul's most treacherous regions. He showed us that the work of healing is not a straight line or a simple fix, it is a spiraling pilgrimage back to the self. It is a path from inner division to inner unity, from the numbness of denial to the clarity of acceptance, from the performance of persona to the truth of presence. His philosophy is a torch for those trapped in the dark corners of their own minds. And if you find yourself caught in any of these places, whether you've wandered into them knowingly or stumbled in without realizing, do not meet yourself with blame. Do not weaponize awareness into self-judgment. These states are not signs of failure but calls to consciousness. To dwell there is human. To awaken from them is divine. Healing does not begin with having the right answers, but with the willingness to finally see. Begin again, not with pressure or perfection, but with gentle self-inquiry. Ask yourself what part of you you've exiled, and begin the quiet work of welcoming it home. Integration is not immediate, it is earned in moments of raw honesty, uncomfortable courage, and daily forgiveness. The soul was never broken, only buried beneath years of noise, fear, and forgetting. And every time you choose to meet yourself with awareness instead of avoidance, with tenderness instead of shame, you begin to unearth it. Piece by piece, memory by memory, breath by breath, until one day it rises, not as something new, but as something ancient that was merely waiting for your return. And in that moment, you remember, you were never lost, only unseen. And now, you see. Embrace the lifelong journey of individuation, not as a distant ideal, but as the most intimate act of reclaiming who you truly are. This process is not a straight road paved with certainty, it's a winding path through the unlit corners of the psyche, where forgotten memories and suppressed emotions quietly wait to be acknowledged. To begin this journey is to choose self-integration over self-abandonment, wholeness over illusion, and depth over comfort. It demands courage, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, daily bravery to face yourself without flinching. It's the strength to sit with your contradictions and not turn away. The power to look into your own eyes and finally say, "This, too, is me." Individuation does not mean becoming perfect, it means becoming honest. It means meeting your anger without shame, your fear without judgment, your past without running. The integration of the conscious and unconscious is not about control, it's about communion. When you understand where your emotions are coming from, when you trace their origins instead of reacting blindly, you shift from being a prisoner of your impulses to a participant in your own becoming. You stop following the scripts written by fear, trauma, or others' expectations, and begin authoring your life from a place of clarity and alignment. This is when fate loses its grip and freedom begins. This is when you stop being a character in someone else's story and start living as the author of your own. Individuation is not a single moment of enlightenment but 1,000 acts of self-awareness. And with every moment of honesty, with every conscious breath, you are no longer just surviving your life, you are living your truth.